Okay, folks, welcome to tonight's Mountain Zoom. We have with us Tara Vaughn from the University of Kentucky, and the topic for tonight is Christmas tree production in Kentucky. And Tara, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then take it away.
Sure. So my name is Tara Vaughn. I'm with the University of Kentucky Department of Horticulture. I am one of their extension associates in the department. I cover commercial ornamentals statewide. So people always ask, what exactly does commercial ornamentals even mean? Um, let's see. So this is what I cover. I cover nursery crops, Christmas trees, and cut flowers for our Kentucky producers. So if you are what we consider a commercial producer, and that really means anything like above a hobby. If you have a business in place and your goal is to make a profit, then you can work with me. If you have questions, need technical assistance, I make farm visits. If you've got dying trees. That's probably the thing I get called out for the most is my trees are dying. Can you come take a look and see what's going on? But really anything, fertility help, irrigation management, anything that you might need a site visit for, I am here for that. I also put together various programs to benefit our statewide growers in these three different areas, and just publish fact sheets. An exciting thing that we do have in the works specifically for Christmas tree growers. Many of you might know if you have tried to find information on Christmas trees in Kentucky from UK, you're probably not going to find a whole lot online. Just last year, we finally took down the Christmas tree manual workbook, which was a fabulous resource at one point, and it did still have a lot of really good info in it, but a lot of things were outdated, and so we didn't really want to spread outdated information any longer. So we took that down, and I am in the works of redoing that manual and updating it and hopefully putting it out chapter by chapter for our Kentucky growers to be able to utilize. Even though I've been in this position for 3 years, I've only been working with Christmas trees through this position. It was kind of an add-on, you can say, as Kentucky Christmas tree farm numbers began to really rise, especially in the last 3 to 5, even 7-ish years. We've really seen the number of Christmas tree farms in Kentucky rise as people are more and more interested in starting a Christmas tree farm, and so. Today, well, this is really geared, what I'm going to share is geared a lot more towards what I would consider Christmas tree 101 type topics, because our Christmas tree industry in Kentucky is, as a whole, at large, so young. I'm going to be speaking to those folks today. But before I really get started into some of the nitty-gritty content, I do want to say that we have some awesome Christmas tree resources that we are starting to put up through UK. So I hosted a virtual Christmas tree 101 webinar. You can watch it anytime if you go to YouTube and visit the Kentucky Horticulture Council page. You can do a quick search for Christmas trees 101. It'll pop up. Just want to plug it here because it's almost 4 hours long, and it has a lot of really good info in it. So we had guest speakers and topics from Penn State. They talked about business planning and management. Michigan State University, Bill Lindbergh, who is kind of the same type position that I am, specifically for Christmas trees in Michigan through Extension. He talked about site selection and planting techniques. Joe Neal with North Carolina State University talked about weed control, which is always a really necessary and something I get asked about a whole lot. Jeff Owen with North Carolina State University, who has actually since retired. I'm really glad that we got to get him to talk after his decades-long dedication to Christmas trees in North Carolina. He talks about species selection. And then Bert Craig, also from Michigan State, talked to us about nutrient management. So lots of really good info packed into that webinar. I encourage you, if you've got questions about these topics, to go and watch at your leisure. Something else that we are also implementing since I kind of took over Christmas tree extension for the state. is having some on-farm workshops and demonstrations. So we hosted our first one last year. We did a pruning and shearing workshop. It was hosted in Lexington. It's a really good time to gather, to be able to see tools in person, to see some of the techniques, look specifically at the tree branches and bud formation and all of these things. And so it's just really valuable to get growers together and to be able to see these things in person and hands-on. So the next one that we are doing hopefully later this year, the date and time is to be announced, but we're doing an insect and pest walk workshop. So that'll be really good. We definitely deal with insect pests here in Kentucky, so I hope that people will be excited about this one as well. Okay, and then something really big and really awesome that I am super excited to talk about, especially since this Zoom, the people that utilize this Zoom series are in Virginia, I believe maybe some West Virginia and Kentucky as well. We are having Kyle Peer from Virginia Tech Cooperative Extension come visit us in Kentucky. It's coming up very quickly. We're hosting a Christmas tree short course on March 10th. Um, so that's a Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time at the Hardin County Extension Office. It says registration opens 2/14, so it is open right now. You can go to the Kentucky Horticulture Council website online, go to their event tab, and you'll see the Christmas tree short course on there. Make sure you register. It's a full day. For full of all sorts of really good information. We'll be talking about pests. We'll be talking about how to choose a sprayer, calibrate your sprayer, understanding labels, talking about weeds, fertility management, pruning and shearing, um, all sorts of really good stuff. So I encourage you, if you can make it on that day and you really want to learn about these things, again, hands-on with the sprayer demo, and network with your fellow Kentucky growers, please come out to that. We would love to have you. Okay, and then if you're looking for more Christmas tree resources, like I said, we are still populating and generating Christmas tree resources for Kentucky, but any Christmas tree resource that you can find right now is housed on UK's Center for Crop Diversification website. You can just plug it into Google. You can literally put CCD UKY in there, and it'll take you to their homepage. Just find the Christmas tree crop page and you'll find resources on there, including a link to that Christmas Tree 101 webinar. Okay, and then as our Christmas tree, number of Christmas tree farms in the state continues to rise, we want to respond to that by letting the public know the benefits of choosing a real Christmas tree and real Christmas greens for their holiday celebrations, as well as letting them know that there is hopefully a farm near them where they can go and possibly start a family tradition, choose a real Christmas tree, and support Kentucky grown. So we started this Christmas tree farm directory last year. Actually, we started it just before Christmas in 2023. And this is the way it currently sits. Now, not all of our Christmas tree farms are on here by any means. A lot of farms have chosen not to be on the map just yet because maybe they're not quite selling their trees yet. So in the next probably 3 to 4 years, we anticipate this map to be much more populated and make it a lot easier for folks all around Kentucky to be able to go to this map and find a farm near them. So this is an interactive map. You can click on any one of these Christmas trees and it will list any of the information that the farm requests us to list, such as links to their social media, links to their website, letting people know if they are a choose and cut tree, if they have add-ons such as photos with Santa, maybe an ornament shop, whatever it is. We're just trying to get that information into consumers' hands. So if you're a Christmas tree grower and you're not on this map and you would like to be on this map, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and we will get you put on there. Okay, and lastly, I really encourage you that if you're a Kentucky Christmas tree grower, to reach out to the Kentucky Christmas Tree Association. The association has been around for years and years. For a while, it was a little bit inactive, but in recent years here, it has really begun to become more active again, which is really exciting. There's in the 30s, there's about 35 member farms a part of the association right now, which is just fantastic. And there's definitely more out there who are not a part of it. Some of the benefits are just networking, really, and learning from your fellow growers. The KCTA is now a member of the Kentucky Horticulture Council, which is a good thing because the Hort Council can, really back KCTA, give them resources, help them promote events and things like that. Currently, the KCTA has two events per year. One is a spring event in April. I believe April 12th is a Saturday, and that is the date of their spring event this year. The spring event is typically focused on fundraising. There's a plant auction. Um, the majority of those raised funds actually goes back into undergraduate scholarships. So that's a really great thing. And then in the fall, they also offer an educational fall meeting where a farm hosts it, and there's a particular topic or topics that are the center of attention that growers get to learn about. So definitely encourage you to reach out to KCTA and become a member. Okay, so now on to the Christmas tree content. So Christmas trees, especially with people who are starting out, it tends to be a little bit idealized and romanticized. People see, this is North Carolina, this is in the Appalachian region where they grow millions of trees, the largest Christmas tree producing region in the US, thousands and thousands, millions of trees. It's easy to see all these rows and rows of beautiful trees and think about how easy it would be to plant, maybe not millions here in Kentucky, but maybe thousands, a couple of thousand. And a lot of people see putting those trees in the ground and then waiting a few years and then making lots of money. But there's a whole lot of steps in between there that are really necessary to be able to produce a good Christmas tree. So we're going to talk about some of those things so that we see more than just dollar signs. So we're going to talk a little bit about some considerations before starting out in Christmas trees. The majority of the markets in Kentucky, we're going to talk about the three S's that I always talk to new growers about, site, soil, and species, and then we'll talk about some production challenges as well. Okay, so there's so much more to growing Christmas trees than just planting them and then harvesting them approximately 7 years later to make money. So let's talk about some of those. You always want to think about what your target market is going to be before you plant anything, whether it's a Christmas tree or a strawberry patch, you always want to consider your markets, what's available to you, what you're interested in, and what's going to be able to make you the money you need for your business to be sustainable and your farm to be sustainable. So we'll talk about markets. A big thing that people actually don't think about until it's sometimes too late is zoning. I worked with a farm in Kentucky who, had planted years of trees, and they were within a year or two of those trees being harvestable size. And so they really started digging into getting their farm ready to set up for a choose and cut style operation. Well, zoning in their county actually ended up shutting them down because their road was not proper enough. I don't remember the details or know the details, but their road was not suitable to handle an operation like this. So zoning, all these things is really important to look at before you even begin. You want to think about your available capital, what kind of equipment you might have to buy. Think about your site selection. We'll talk definitely more detail about site selection, but the biggest thing is we don't want heavy waterlogged soils. Christmas trees will just not survive very well there. Think about your microclimates. Maybe if you're planting in a holler type region, your climate is going to be different than if you're planting in a wide open field out in Western Kentucky that tends to run a little bit warmer. Organic versus conventional is a big thing that I get asked about. There's a lot of producers who want to produce organically, which is great, but it's a lot tougher to do in Christmas trees. And so it's just something to consider. We also want to consider our soil pH as Christmas tree, not only survival, but also like a thriving, healthy tree really depends on soil pH and composition. Fertility, choosing the right species for your farm, also very important. Kentucky is not known as being a wonderful Christmas tree growing region, but it is possible with right species selection. You have to shear and shape your Christmas tree to get it to be that look that consumers want to put in their homes. And there's so much more, so much more. We'll go into some of these things a little bit more in detail today. One, we'll just very briefly talk about the markets in Kentucky because the markets in Kentucky currently are pretty simple. The vast majority of our Christmas tree growers here in the state are choose and cut operations. Now, choose and cut does mean a couple of different things to different people. So, choose and cut may simply be we have operations that have a couple week period where people can come out, walk the fields, and tag their tree, essentially claiming it. Hey, as we get closer to Christmas, this is the tree I want. So they come out, tag them, and then as we get closer to Christmas, the farm cuts the tree for that person, and those people come back and pick up their tree. Also choose and cut for probably for more people means that they want to invite people and their families and their children out to the farm where they can wander the fields, choose their tree, and use a saw to cut it down themselves. People also offer options of going and choosing their tree and then having a farm employee cut it down for you. That's still choose and cut. So that's the vast majority of our market here in Kentucky. But there are also a lot of farms who will buy in pre-cut trees, possibly from someplace like North Carolina. And some farms operate where they sell the majority of pre-cut trees, or the majority of their business is the selling of pre-cut trees. And some farms will bring in some trees that are pre-cut as a portion of their sales. So maybe their farm, really just isn't set up, their climate, their soil, whatever it might be. It just does not work for them to grow a Fraser fir. And we all know that Fraser fir is definitely kind of the gold star for Christmas trees nowadays. But maybe their farm just can't handle it. So they will buy in some Fraser firs to sell along with maybe the spruce and pine or other fir species that they grow on their farm. And then wholesale, there's just very little wholesale in Kentucky, primarily because most of our farms here in the state at this point are not large enough or interested in handling wholesale. They're really trying to snag those retail prices and create like a farm in a Christmas environment on their farm for the consumer to come out to their farm. Okay, so let's move on to the three S's. The first two are site and soil. So before you ever get started, even if you have already gotten started and you haven't gotten your soil tested, please reach out to your myself or your county agent, and let's get your soil tested. The soil test will give us some much needed information that will clue us in on how successful your farm might be as a Christmas tree farm, and will also really help us choose species that are going to thrive the best in your soil. So as you probably know, Kentucky has a lot of limestone, and we have a lot of karst environment here. So a lot of times, that limestone will actually raise the pH of soil. That's a little bit higher than what we want for most Christmas tree species. So while there are absolutely plenty of places in Kentucky where the native soils are suitable, are acidic enough to successfully grow Christmas trees. In a lot of areas, we're actually fighting less than ideal soil pH. Kentucky is also has a lot of heavy clay soils in many areas. Now we are not as bad as say Georgia with their heavy red clays, but we do have heavier clay soils, and a lot of Christmas tree species that's just not ideal for them. And so there are things that we can do and measures that we can take to combat or overcome those heavier clay soils, but it is a concern. And then I also work with a lot of growers who deal with hard pans or fragipans in their planting areas. And a lot of time, you might not even know that you have that hard pan until you've planted something there and, things just aren't draining, maybe. So, more and more as growers are establishing their Christmas tree farms, we are encouraging them to not only till the ground that they are planting into, but if they know that they have heavy clay soils or they know they have a hard pan layer under their soils that's at a fairly shallow depth, to use a subsoiler, or a lot of people around here call them a ripper, but use those when establishing a new planting area. We've been encouraging some growers who were fighting some issues with hard pans to implement this practice for a couple years now, and we've really seen visible success with doing that. So if you know you have this issue, maybe consider utilizing a subsoiler. Now, we do want to take care of our soils, and we do want to discourage the use of over-tilling and over subsoiling. So just keep that in mind. If you have questions about what is too much, what is too little, what do I need to do, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Okay, so planting and establishment considerations. So you've gotten your soil tested. You know what species you want to plant. Now we need to talk about actually prepping your site. So we talked about tilling and subsoiling or ripping if possible and if it's needed on your farm, because loosening your soil is important. Um, I collect samples for trees that are dying, and we're looking to see if it's a biotic issue or an abiotic issue. And I go to dig these little seedlings, and the roots are exactly the way they were when they were planted, whether a plug was planted and the roots have not expanded from that plug, or whether you were planting bare roots and maybe it was put in with a dibble bar or something. Um, the roots just have not been able to take hold and expand out of that initial planting formation that it was put into the soil. So, planting techniques. There are mechanical planters out there. If you are planting enough trees and you have the capital that you would like to invest in a mechanical planter, we do have some growers who are utilizing mechanical planters, or who are exploring or interested in using mechanical planters to speed up the process and just increase efficiency in their operations. Dibble bar has been a planting technique that has been around a long time. I often see a lot of negative effects with the dibble bar, so I don't encourage people to use a dibble bar. The thing that we most often see is J rooting. If you're not familiar with J rooting, it's when the roots are put into the soil and they're not put in quite properly, going in a downward direction. And so the root, the very tips of them on the bottom actually form up in a J towards the soil surface. And when we have especially significant J rooting in Christmas trees, it's really hard for these little seedlings to come back from it. Um, Also with dibble bars, if your soil is too wet, which we do fight that in the spring sometimes, especially with more heavy clay soils, we see a lot of sidewall compaction when a dibble bar is used. And so sometimes we'll dig up seedlings who have died to try to investigate what's going on with them. And the roots will be they will be 2D instead of 3D. Because of the way that it was planted with that dibble bar. So we encourage a lot of people to try out using an auger that aerates the soil immediately around the roots a little bit better. It greatly reduces the chance of J rooting and that sidewall compaction. So utilizing an auger, whether that's on a drill or you can get, much larger ones, augers are a good way to go. And then when you're getting your trees established, the first couple years, the first year or two is absolutely the hardest. Your trees, especially with hot Kentucky summers here in central Kentucky and even worse over in western Kentucky, and also eastern Kentucky, we really need to think about making sure that our new plantings have adequate water. Another thing is making sure that your little seedlings are not competing against weeds too much. I've been to farms where you really couldn't see the tree through the weeds. And, that's a problem because even though maybe when you put in these seedlings, they were much larger than the weeds around them, it does not take long for weeds to overgrow. And so you really need to have a weed management plan in place. Okay. All right, so now let's move to the third S. Let's talk about species. So selecting the right tree for your farm. Um, I'm going to go over some of the species that are most commonly planted here in Kentucky. Everybody wants to plant a fir because the consumer wants a fir tree in their house. If you Google, real Christmas tree, family cutting real Christmas tree on farm, it's going to bring up a lot of pictures, and a lot of them are going to be fir trees. And firs are certainly beautiful trees. They have a lot of great characteristics that make a wonderful Christmas tree. But they are a little bit more difficult to grow here in Kentucky, some more than others. If you've done any sort of research or you have planted some of these on your farm, you'll know that Fraser fir is the most difficult out of these three fir species. But these are the first species that the majority of growers are planting here in Kentucky. We'll go into each one in more detail here. And then spruce, Norway spruce is definitely the most common spruce species that people are planting here in Kentucky. We do also have some white spruce being grown. And then pines, people are growing pines. White pine is definitely the most common variety. I have Scotch pine and blue spruce over here with big X's in them. That's not to say you can't plant them, but many growers have moved away from planting these two species here in Kentucky and also elsewhere because of the diseases that take both of these varieties out more easily. Needle cast has just Blue spruce has taken a terribly hard hit from needle cast, and there's a number of diseases that affect Scotch pine. So these are just not your best options. So we don't encourage growers to plant those anymore. But we do have growers that are experimenting with growing what are considered more of the exotic species nowadays. Now, exotic, people always ask me what exactly does exotic mean? Like, is it exotic because it has foreign names? It's a Korean fir and a Turkish fir. Yes, but also basically in the sense of the Christmas tree world, exotic indicates species that are outside of the normal realm of the ones that have been traditionally grown for Christmas trees. So here in Kentucky, I have seen the growers who are experimenting with some of these exotic species. These are the two most common. Trojan fir would be kind of in third place, I guess. But the Korean fir and the Turkish fir, and we are having success with them for the most part. But they are a little bit more picky on their environment, and these exotic species are much slower to grow. So you've got a much more significant time investment with these species of trees than you do most of the other species. Okay, so let's talk about the Fraser because the Fraser is kind of the gold child, the pillar. So it has a lot of wonderful characteristics. It's the reason that it's the number one Christmas tree in the nation. So the branches turn slightly upward. It has a really nice coloring. The needles are dark blue to green in color. It's similar to a balsam fir, which we really don't grow here. Those are much more suited for the Pacific Northwest type area. But they're very similar to a balsam fir. Really, the only big difference between the two is the fact that Frasers are grown more on this side of the country and balsams are grown more on the in the Pacific Northwest. But Fraser firs do need fertile ground, and they require about 7 to 10 years to produce a 6 to 7 foot tree. Now, I say 7 to 10 years. This is with very little pointed management towards these trees. You can get a Fraser fir to a 6 to 7 foot height in less than 10 years for sure, but it does require more weed management, maybe some irrigation management, fertility, and things like that. And they require a very low soil pH of about 5 to 5.5. So, with that pH and soil pH in mind, a lot of places in Kentucky just do not have soils that are that acidic. So, it's something that you really should consider putting a species that really is so needy here in Kentucky in a soil that's already not suited for them from the get-go. But there are some pros and cons here. So the pros, it has a very desired natural form. You can see here in this picture, it's a beautiful tree. It has a very pleasant scent. It's not, some trees actually do smell bad, but it's not an overwhelming scent either. It has good needle retention, which is definitely a characteristic that any grower wants to look for in a tree that they are producing on their farm. Especially as the consumer, it seems that the consumer is wanting to buy these trees earlier and earlier in the season. We see a lot of farms even considering opening up their farms to the public before Thanksgiving. And so good needle retention is really important. You also want your consumer to be able to put ornaments, and sometimes heavy ornaments on the branches. And so strong branches is also really important. Some of the biggest cons is that Phytophthora is definitely, or Frasers are definitely susceptible to Phytophthora root rot. They are susceptible in any environment, but especially when we're growing them at these lower elevations, and not, in the mountains of North Carolina, for example. So we see a lot of Phytophthora issues here in Kentucky in Fraser firs. And then there's actually also a number of insects that Frasers are also really susceptible to. So those are the biggest cons for Fraser firs. But lucky for us, the Canaan, you might have heard it, Canaan, 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 Canaan. There, it depends on who you talk to as to who say, how they say it, honestly. So the Canaan fir is a really good alternative to the Fraser. If you were to put these two trees side by side, really to the untrained eye, which is the eye of the majority of consumers, you're really not going to see a big difference. But the Canaan is much easier to grow here in Kentucky. It does still like a cool climate, as does pretty much every Christmas tree species. And it does require a good amount of moisture in the soils, with well-drained soils. But there are more pros to the Canaan firs than there are cons, in my opinion. The Canaan still has that desired natural form. It has a moderate scent, again, pleasant but not overwhelming. Also, that good needle retention and strong branches for hanging ornaments. But the things that are really, I guess, good things about the Canaan fir versus Frasers is that they are much, much more adaptable to various soil conditions. And so, being that we don't have the ideal soils here in Kentucky for growing Christmas trees, the Canaan is really great choice because it is more accepting of various soils. And they also tend to break bud a little bit later than most other fir species, which is good because if you live here in Kentucky, you know that you never know what spring might bring, and it is certainly not uncommon for us to have a late frost or freeze. And so to avoid some freeze or frost damage, it's nice that this species breaks bud a little bit later. And then it also is more drought tolerant. And I hate using the word tolerant because it really still isn't drought tolerant, but it's more drought tolerant than our Fraser fir and other fir species as well. Cons, it is still susceptible to Phytophthora, but it is not nearly as susceptible as Fraser. So if you have a planting of Fraser and a planting of Canans, um, you will have much less incidence of Phytophthora in your Canans than your Frasers typically. Okay, and then another fir species that people are growing here is the concolor or white fir. It is a little bit less conical in its natural shape than the Fraser and the Canaan. You can see here it's a little bit more bushy, rounded type, and it does have small, narrow needles, which are a little bit different than the Fraser and the Canaan. The upper branches have thicker needles, and they're actually a little bit curved when you look at them closely. Doesn't affect the overall look of the tree, it's just a difference. And the younger needles are a bluish gray, and then they turn to a duller green as they age. So do you guys see what I'm talking about here in this picture? The color difference from the older um, to the younger, and you can see that the younger ones are a little bit more bluish gray versus this kind of duller green that you see as they age. Again, not a bad thing, just a characteristic of concolors. So some pros to a concolor is that it is tolerant to a considerable amount of shade compared to other fir species. So if you have a section of the your field that you are wanting to plant, but it does get a little bit more shade than the rest of your field, maybe consider putting some concolors there. Like the other firs, it really needs ideally moist, loamy soils, but it is a little bit more forgiving if you have shallower topsoils and drier soils as well. Good needle retention, like all of its other ones in the fir family. And this one also has a pleasing aroma, and it's kind of like citrus-like. It's one of those things that you really have to smell it to know what I'm talking about, but it does have a pleasing scent. Some of the cons are that if you have mistletoe on your property and it is uncontrolled, it can be severely damaged by mistletoe. It's also susceptible to a few insects that are listed here as bark beetles, spruce budworm, Douglas fir, tussock moth. There's a few that really choose to attack the concolors over other fir species, so something to consider. Okay, spruce. Like I said, the Norway spruce is by far the most popular spruce species that's grown here in Kentucky. Some of its characteristics are they have dark green needles. So we talked about some of the bluish green needles that our fir friends have, and you can see the difference here in this photo. That the color of this tree is more of a green. It does have some more drooping branches. And then the needles are four-sided, so they're rectangular in shape, rectangular needles, where the needles of our fir species are flat. And it's not uncommon for people to brush up against a spruce and kind of, ow, I wasn't expecting that because they do have sharp needle tips. So maybe not quite consumer friendly or kid friendly. But it does need deep, rich soils and it does require adequate watering or rainfall. So some of the pros, that it's less susceptible to the eastern spruce gall aphid than other spruce species. So that contributes to it being one of the most popular species. And it does make a great ball and burlap Christmas tree choice. And moving down to the cons, it does make a great ball and burlap Christmas tree choice because it does have very poor needle retention. If somebody comes out to a choose and cut farm the weekend after Thanksgiving and cuts one of those Norway spruces, chances are that by the time Christmas Day gets here, we're going to have a lot of needle drop. And that's just one of the characteristics of Norway spruce, unfortunately. So if you are wanting to fresh cut Norway spruce, we definitely recommend that you reserve those cuts for the weeks leading right up to Christmas so that your customer has good needle retention. Or you invest in some machinery or a way for this tree to be a ball and burlap type tree. Ball and burlap type trees are becoming more and more popular. It's not the thing that you think of as a traditional Christmas tree tradition, but more and more folks are seeing it as a sustainable Christmas measure. So they ball and burlap this tree. They can either give it back to the farm, they can donate it to be planted somewhere. A lot of people will plant them on their own property and watch that tree grow over the years. And it's just memories of Christmas past. So Norways make a really good option for that. But Norways do not form a taproot like our other Christmas tree species. So they are a little bit more susceptible to wind damage and blowing over if you are in a very wind heavy area. That's something to consider. Again, it just like the other, it can take 11 or 8 to 11 years to produce a 6 to 7 foot tree, but you can bring that number down by intensive management. Okay, white pine. Some characteristics of white pine being that this is primarily the pine species that's grown here. It has soft, flexible needles. So those are very different from the needles of both fir species and spruce species. The needles are bluish green, longer needles, but these you can produce much quicker than you can produce a fir or a spruce species. So in 6 to 8 years, again, you can reduce that maybe a little bit. Um, that's what it takes to produce a good 6 foot tree to sell off of your farm. Pros, that is that it has good needle retention, very little aroma, and it's very adaptable to soil conditions. So if you have a sandier soil or even a soil that's fairly rocky, pine might be a good option to put on your farm. Some of the cons is that it does not have the strongest branches. So, the hanging of heavy ornaments might pose a problem for the consumer. It is susceptible to white pine blister rust disease, and it's also susceptible to white pine weevil, but these can be managed. Okay, so those are the common species that we most often recommend for planting here in Kentucky. So now we just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to go through these last few things. Managing needs for water in Kentucky. If you live here, you probably know that Kentucky can have a very wet spring and then a very dry summer and fall as well. So managing water is really important. Um, the summer and fall, it's really not unusual to have drought or near drought conditions here. It does get hot and it does get humid. And so especially on your new Christmas tree plantings, we have been encouraging folks more and more to have access to water on their farm at minimum, but even recommending that they have irrigation systems in place. Last year, here in central Kentucky, which is where I'm located, we had drought conditions that occurred really more into the fall, but like July, starting in July through September, October timeframe. And so, I had growers calling me left and right. What do I do? Even with watering my trees, even with having this irrigation on, it just seems like my trees are stalled. And, what we could do is we're just trying to get these trees through this drought phase. You might lose some growth potential, but your tree is going to survive. But there are a lot of folks who didn't have maybe the time to hand water, did not have irrigation in place, that they lost a lot of trees. And we're seeing more and more drought-like conditions every year during the summer and early fall in Kentucky. So we really recommend having a plan in place for water usage for Christmas trees, especially while getting your trees established in the first couple years. Okay, and then I've talked about Phytophthora in talking about some of our species selection slides. So Phytophthora is a root rot. It's a water mold, meaning one of the things that means is that it travels via water. So drop splash, um, mud on your tractor tires or on your boots, um, mud and water on your pruners, things like that. But not just Phytophthora. Our Christmas trees are affected by other root rots as well, but Phytophthora is definitely the number one that we see. So the biggest thing I can suggest to people, especially if it's known that you have Phytophthora on your farm, is to plant a more resistant species. Since most people are really wanting to dial in their fir species production, I recommend, again, planting that Canaan fir because it does have a little bit more, I won't use the word resistance, but tolerance to Phytophthora. We are also encouraging people to do a root or plug dip application of Subdue Max, which is a fungicide that is specifically targets water molds like Phytophthora. And depending on whether you do the root dip, if you're fall planting or spring planting, we can come up with a schedule for you, but additional applications may be needed in the spring or fall. And then because these water molds can move so freely via water through your fields or via your boots, equipment, things like that, I really encourage sanitation practices with your equipment. Okay, and then lastly, just a few other things. These are not things we're going to go into detail on at all, but other things for Kentucky growers to start thinking about as they get their Christmas tree farms established. You've got your tree growing and established, and maybe now you need to actually start pruning and shaping that tree so that it looks the way you want it to as it grows. You always want to have a handle on weed control. That is from the get-go. Immediately after you put your trees in the ground, and even really before you put the trees in the ground, you can start controlling weeds with a pre-emergent herbicide. We have a lot of perennial and invasive weeds in Kentucky that are difficult to manage, but we can get you on a program for weed management. Also talking about managing compaction and erosion. Most of the time, our Christmas tree plantings that we see are not in flat fields. There is some sort of slope to the field. So we see some erosion issues if it's not maintained properly. So encouraging adding organic matter, whether that be utilizing wood chips as part of your weed suppression um, program, or encouraging cover cropping in between your rows. And then managing fertility. A lot of people, start fertilizing their trees a little bit too early sometimes, and that can cause some issues. And then again, this is where soil test really comes into play. You want to keep a regular soil test on file for yourself. We don't want to add too much of things like phosphorus because many Kentucky soils are already high in phosphorus. And we really want to focus on nitrogen during the vast majority of your trees' growth over the years. So, that is all I have, I believe. Yes. So, again, I am here for all commercial producers in the state of Kentucky. If you have questions, please reach out to me at my email there, and we will figure out whatever it is that you need. And that is all I have. If there's questions from anyone, I'd
Good
be happy
job,
to.
Tara. Uh, I did want to say that having grown Christmas trees, the weed thing cannot be overstressed. Um,
You're
we
right.
did not realize that when we got into it at the office. We did this as like a demonstration. And, I had read a little bit, but it didn't register. And the weeds almost took the trees, and it was just constant battle to try to battle the weeds so that the trees could grow. And then we've continued to have problems with poison ivy. Birds love to fly into the trees, and when they've fed on the berries of the poison ivy, then they want to fly into the tree and roost. And so briars come in. We get a lot of things coming up in the middle of the tree. So if you think you're going to control that with weed eating or mowing, the answer is no.
Right. I have to say, I don't think I have seen that issue before. I mean, I can absolutely believe how it happens, but I don't think I've actually seen it yet. Knock on wood. But that doesn't sound like a fun situation.
Not at all. And we also found out that if you grow these on um, steeper hillside, like what you would see in North Carolina and Tennessee, you do get into an issue when it comes pruning time. The north side of the tree will be stunted, and the
As
south side will grow more. And so, pruning wise, you're having to focus a lot more on that south side of the tree to try to keep the tree balanced.
you're right. Yep, absolutely.
Are these hand sheared for the most part in Kentucky, or are they using some kind of mechanical shearing?
A lot of people are using mechanical shearing. I'd say that most people are using, if they're using something mechanical, they're using a Benicky. We have people who swear by using that, battery powered or gas powered. And then we have some people who literally still hand prune all of their trees. And it really, my opinion on that is that either way can be done correctly. It really is just um, what exact shape do you want your Christmas tree to have? Hand pruning allows for what I would consider to be a little bit more natural look. Whereas using something like a Benicki, where you're literally going up and down like this around your tree, produces that more just really rigid, conical shape, which is great. Either of those options are perfectly acceptable. It just really is how much time do you want to put into it, and do you have a market that demands one thing over the other? So, but I'd say most people are not really using a shearing knife here in Kentucky, even though that is also a popular method of pruning. But most people are probably using a Benicki.
The shearing knife, my experience is that is exhausting.
Yes.
And maybe they get used to it, but I could tell you for an office worker, if you go out and try to shear 100 trees with one of those knives, um, your forearm will feel it. I mean, I was very sore for 2 or 3 days after shearing the trees at the office, and that's just a handful. So
Yeah.
they had a large planting. I don't know how they do that.
It's very impressive. I actually went to a demonstration in Ohio last summer where they did a shearing knife demonstration, and those guys who do it day in and day out, they're certainly more accustomed to it, but they can get a tree done in 10 seconds or less, and they just roll. It's really impressive. But these farms that have thousands and thousands and thousands of trees, you have to be able to move through your plantings that quickly. It- in Kentucky here, we don't really have farms that are that huge, so growers here have a little bit more of a choice on the time that they want to spend pruning and shearing. But it is definitely a time-consuming thing, no matter what method you use.
So a typical farmer in Kentucky, what would you say the size is, acreage or number of trees?
That is a good question. So we actually have a Christmas tree. I should have plugged this on here and I did not. We actually have a Christmas tree grower survey that's out right now. Um, and one of the questions on there is how many trees are you growing and on how many acres, so that we can get a better picture of what the industry in Kentucky looks like. But just based on, the farms that I work with and totally, non-statistical and non just my mind's numbers. I would say most of our farms here in Kentucky currently are planting anywhere from 500 to 1,000 trees per year right now.
Okay, pretty good.
Mhm.
Jeremy, I've seen you pop in several times and grin and then turn your video back off. So I'm going to see if you have something you're wanting to ask.
Nothing to add. Just great presentation, Tara. Jeremy Williams here in Harlan County, the ag agent, and I really appreciate this presentation. Good stuff. Great information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Do you all usually set up at like Oak or at the Fruit and Vegetable Conference, or is there an event other than this thing in Hardin County? Is there's some kind of an event that people could go to learn more?
No, there is not. And that's why we are starting to, we, as in myself, are starting to create some more events because there really hasn't been like anyone in extension for Christmas trees since the early 2000s when the Department of Forestry had someone in their department that handled Christmas trees at least part-time. And so there really hasn't been like anything for Christmas tree growers in the last couple of decades. And so, no, if you go to Oak or Fruit and Veg, you're really not going to find anything about Christmas trees at any of those. At the Kentucky Nursery and Landscape Association's winter conference, just about a month ago, they did for the first time have a session on Christmas trees. It was Christmas Trees 101. So there was that, but really there's nothing else. So I'm trying to create some more content and some more, knowledge transfer and networking opportunities for our Kentucky growers.
Well, just looking at that map that you showed at the beginning, I noticed that a lot of the growing is taking place in central Kentucky, which makes sense. It's close to the markets. But if
Mhm.
you make a comparison with Tennessee and North Carolina, most of their production is in the mountains. And in Virginia, it's in the mountains. It's in the steep mountains. And so I noticed that there were no operations on the map in the east. And it would seem that that would be a good fit
It,
for non-row crop land. So we'd like to try to get you to the east. I don't know if that might be the East Kentucky Farmers Conference. That might be a good one to go
that,
to,
Mhm. Yeah, I'm happy
or just
to, yeah, that would be wonderful. There's a lot of growing potential in Eastern Kentucky for sure, based on climate. Um, markets is more of a concern, and I think a lot of Eastern Kentucky folks would had to bring some markets maybe into more like Central Kentucky or Northern Kentucky where there is more of a population, more buyers for their trees. But as far as growing goes, certainly Eastern Kentucky is better than Central Kentucky and definitely better than Western Kentucky.
well, we've got Hazard and Pikeville and Ashland, and all
Hmm.
of those are pretty big and growing towns. So maybe not on par with Lexington and Louisville, but um, probably a sufficient market for a smaller operation. So,
And I have worked with a couple of growers around Ashland. Now, I've not worked with any around Hazard, Pikeville, London, but I have worked with a couple that are starting out in the Ashland area, so that's exciting.
very good. Well, thank you for coming and being with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. And we'll probably be calling on you, trying to get you to come down and speak to maybe a group of counties or something. So
That would be great. That would
very
be
good.
awesome. I will stop sharing here.
All right. Well, folks,
Thank you so much for.
yes, yes. We're glad that you were willing. Ellen highly recommended you. So you did a great job. You didn't disappoint. So um,
Good to know.
folks, we hope you have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you at the next Mountain Zoom.